Well, we're back in Genesis 28 this week, and last time out we saw, didn't we, Jacob meeting with the Lord. We had the pile of stones that Jacob set up, we had the dream, we had the stairway reaching up to heaven, and we met the angels descending and ascending on that stairway or that ladder. And we heard God dedicate himself to Jacob. And remember, Yahweh reiterates the same promise that he made to Abraham, but this time it's to Abraham's grandson. Jacob is the rightful heir, the promised seed through which the saviour of the world will come. And as I said last sermon, there were things that I couldn't get round to covering. So this week we're going to tie up some loose ends. But first of all, let's tie up the passage from last time. So remember, Jacob has had to flee from his brother Esau. Esau's determined to kill him for his deception. He didn't steal the birthright, but he got the blessing from his dad by dressing up, didn't he? And we saw Jacob is the inverse of Abraham. He's got a lot of growing up to do, a lot of maturing to do. And God's going to sanctify Jacob by putting him through a 20-year nightmare at the hands of his uncle Laban. That's how God is going to transform this man's character. Jacob will eventually be renamed Israel, the one who wrestles with God. So God appears to him and reassures him, verse 15, "Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Well, Jacob's had this dream. How does he respond to this amazing meeting with God? Well, let's focus on three things he does. Three things. Preachers love a bit of alliteration, so we'll stick with the letter A, right? The first thing he does is make an announcement, verse 16. "Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said," or he announced, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid, and he said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Jacob recognises the awesome event that has just taken place. Up until now, he'd only ever heard his father talk about Yahweh. And maybe he'd seen Jacob sacrificing to the Lord. But he hadn't understood. He didn't know what the relationship was all about. But now, Jacob has come face to face with God. God has spoken to him. When something dramatic happens to us, we can't stop talking about it, can we? And that's what happens to Jacob. He declares, "This place, this is special. This is where I had my moment. This is an awesome place." Now, Bethel is at the top of a valley. So you imagine you've got the River Jordan, right, going through the middle. Then you've got Jericho next to the Jordan, and you go up the hill towards Bethel. It's up high. It's close to God. And of course, thinking about this higher place, we get echoes of Eden, don't we? Eden's on a mountain. Well, this place is mountainous. And this, Jacob says, this is the gate of heaven. Yahweh has literally come down to meet me. We've got a lot of these types of houses in London, don't we? You've got steps going up to the front door. Well, this is the kind of picture here. This is what Jacob has discovered. The Lord has appeared to Jacob at his front door. And the entrance is Bethel. Secondly, Jacob creates some architecture, verses 18 and 19. "So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he'd put under his head and he set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at first." Now remember, we learned last week that the word under, that he put under his head, isn't in the original Hebrew. And obviously, if he's going to make a pillar out of this stone, it can't have been a pillow. You don't make pillars out of pillows. So imagine he moves this thing and then he maybe gets some other stones and stacks them up. I tried with AI. That's the best it wanted to come up with. these stones were by his head. He was hiding under them or behind them. And he anoints this place with oil. And he calls this awesome place Bethel, so house of gods. In Jacob's mind, as I said, he is in Yahweh's front garden and he's looking up the stairs. This is a signpost. He's telling everyone this is the place where you can meet God. Finally, Jacob makes an agreement, a vow, a promise. Verse 20, then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord, Yahweh, shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. Do you see how Jacob is the inverse of Abraham? Abraham follows Yahweh by faith. He simply obeys. But Jacob's obedience is dependent on God keeping his end of the bargain. You've made promises, so if you keep them, well, then I'll be your servant. So if the Lord feeds me and clothes me and protects me and brings me back to this place, to this hillside, and I get to live again in my father's house, and I get to be the actual true heir, well, then I will serve God. Then I'll give him a tenth of all my riches. Okay, that's our passage, very short, but you're not going to get an early night because we've got a bit of thinking to do. Earlier, we read John's Gospel, chapter 1, verse 43 to 51, didn't we? And we saw the very first meeting between Jesus and Nathanael. Nathanael would become one of his disciples. And as he's speaking to Nathanael, Jesus makes a direct link between himself and Genesis 28. Why does Jesus bring up Genesis 28? Why does he choose to refer to this passage in Genesis as he introduces himself to Nathanael? Well, as you read through the Gospels, you find out Jesus knows what people are thinking about, doesn't he? He knows what the Pharisees are thinking when they question him. He knows when people have been healed, even if they're not in his presence. Remember the woman at the well in Samaria? He knows all about her history. And therefore he knows all about Nathanael. In fact, turn to John 1 a minute. John 1 verse 47. John 1:47. Jesus saw Nathanael coming towards him and said of him, behold, an Israelite indeed in whom there is no deceit. Nathanael said to him, how do you know me? Jesus answered him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Nathanael has been praying and meditating under a fig tree, wrestling with the Lord. And Jesus tells him, I saw you there. Well, what had Nathanael been thinking about? What had he been praying about? Well, I think it's obvious, isn't it? He'd been meditating on Bethel, meditating on Jacob's experience. Otherwise, why does Jesus mention it? He wants to reassure Nathanael. And I might be wrong, but I think Nathanael was asking the Lord under the fig tree this question: what have you done with Bethel? Where is Bethel? Bethel, the house of God, the place where God promised himself to our forefather Jacob and then to the nation Israel. Nathanael wants to know, where is that place? And where is the promise you made to Jacob? So that's the title of our sermon. Where is Bethel? And what we're going to do in your minds, I want you to just stay focused. Have a picture of Bethel in your mind. We're going to stay focused on this little hillside in Israel above the Jordan. And what we're going to do, we're going to speed through. We're going to press the fast forward button, bit of time lapse, and we're going to speed through hundreds, thousands of days, years, months, weeks. And we're going to drop in on Bethel throughout church history and see what's happening there. And maybe, because Nathanael knows what I'm about to tell you, that's what he's been thinking about, I think. And we need to know what he was thinking so we can understand what Jesus is saying to him in John 1. So that's the question tonight. Where is Bethel? Well, a simple answer, a short answer to where is Bethel is it's there. It's slap bang in the middle of Israel. As I said, it's up the road from Jericho, up on a hillside. But again, that's just words on a page. So we're going to trace its history. We'll trace the history of Bethel through 3 stages. Stage number 1, the birth of Bethel. So we've got a time-lapse camera, and it's pointed at Jacob's pile of stones. Have that in your mind. And we hit the fast-forward button. And we speed through 20 years. Jacob goes off to Uncle Laban. And he gets married twice, and he has a load of kids, and his flocks increase. And Genesis 32, he comes back into Canaan, and he wrestles with God, and God gives him a new name. He's worried that Esau's going to kill him. But, spoiler alert, Genesis 33, Esau doesn't kill him. And Genesis 35, he makes his way back to the hillside, back to his monument. Remember, he promised Yahweh, if you look after me, if you feed me and bring me back here, I will be yours. And in Genesis 35, God keeps his end of the bargain. I'm going to be going through a lot of the Bible. I've brought it up on the screen, so don't feel you have to turn there. I mean, you can make a gasp to get there, but it might be easier to read it off the screen. Genesis 35. God keeps his end of the bargain. Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him. And there he built an altar and called the place El Bethel. El Bethel means the God of the house of God, the God of Bethel. 20 years earlier, remember, Jacob had been enamored with the place. This is the place. The important thing is the place. But now he knows God. Now he's saying the Lord is the important thing about this place. He's far more enriched by the relationship than he is by the location. Because it was there that God had revealed himself to him when he fled from his brother. Well, God keeps his promises, doesn't he? He's brought Jacob safely back to this hillside. But what else did we just read in Genesis 28? Well, verse 13, look what God said to him. Behold, the Lord stood above it. So he stood on the steps of his house at the front door, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. But in Genesis 35, Jacob does not own the land, does he? The hillside is not his. In fact, the town of Luz is full of Canaanites. Okay, so is God going to keep that promise? Well, let's fast forward again. We're going to go forward 800 years. Jacob disappears down the mountain. He and his sons end up living in Egypt eventually. And they live a life of luxury. And their clan grows. It goes from a few hundred to a few thousand to just over 1 million. But in that time, we know the story, in Egypt they become slaves. They cry out to God, who raises up Moses, who leads them out of slavery. And they wander in the wilderness for 40 years until they're ready to trust the Lord, ready to take over the land of Canaan. And when Moses dies, a great warrior by the name of Yeshua or Joshua leads them back to the land of their forefathers, back to Canaan. And they drive out the Canaanites. But there's one little city that stubbornly won't budge, a little city called Luz. It's always been a problem. It's well defended and they can't figure out how to get in. Well, that changes in Judges chapter 1. Judges 1:22, the house of Joseph, so the clan of Joseph, went up against Bethel and the Lord was with them. And the house of Joseph scouted out Bethel. Now, the name of the city was formerly Luz. And the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, please show us the way into the city, and we will deal kindly with you. And he showed them the way into the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword. But they let the man and all his family go. 800 years after Jacob's dream, God's promise is finally fulfilled. Now, the land where he once slept, that land now belongs to his descendants. And now Israel truly can say, well, our land is the gateway to heaven. We've inherited the front garden. This is where the Most High, the creator of all of the universe, can be reached and worshipped. And Bethel, the house of God, has been born. Okay, second stage. The reign of Bethel. Now as we look at our hillside, as we imagine it, there's a city on it. It's been occupied by Joseph's descendants. And throughout Judges, whenever the people want to speak to Yahweh, where do they head? Well, they head to this town. They head to Jacob's monument, Bethel. In fact, Judges 2, verse 1, God comes down to the people to tell them off. It's like he opens the front door to tell off his unruly children. What's it say? Judges 2. Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim. Bochim is believed to be another name for Bethel. And the angel said, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you have done? So when God wants to speak to the people, where does he do it? He does it at Bethel. When the people want to get an answer from the Lord, they go and knock on his door. Judges 20, verse 18. The people of Israel arose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God, who shall go up first to fight against the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. So do you see, Jacob's altar and Jacob's monument, they become a place marker. They're being used so that the Israelites can find, see and speak to the Lord. Fast forward another couple of hundred years, we meet a prophet named Samuel. He's a prophet and a judge. And where does he do business? Well, 1 Samuel 7. Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life, and he went on a circuit year by year to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and he judged Israel in all of these places. The gate of heaven now has a mediator sitting in it at certain times of the year, a prophet, a judge. Bethel was reached full maturity. She is the front door of heaven. I imagine, I'm not sure, but I imagine there would have been servants and priests, maybe some sort of special building there, a sanctuary, a proper temple. This is where you can go and knock on the door and speak to God. This is his house. And think about it, most of the promises that God had promised Jacob have come to fruition. Jacob's children own the land. There's a lot of them. There's blessing. He's brought Jacob back here. But there's still not a king. Will a king turning up make everything better? Well, third stage, predictably perhaps, is the fall of Bethel. We fast forward, so Samuel's time, fast forward 150 years. 150 years flash by. Samuel anoints Saul as king, but Saul is useless. So Samuel anoints David as king. Samuel dies, Saul dies, David reigns in Jerusalem. And David has a son called Solomon. Now David as king does something interesting. He moves the focus of Yahweh worship from Bethel to Jerusalem. He moves it south down the road a few miles. He puts the Ark of the Covenant, that box, remember, that God had told them to make, that golden box with the angel's wings on it, the footstool of God. He takes it and he puts it in a tent next door to his house. David is saying, in essence, the gate of heaven, that thing we call Bethel, the house of God, well, it's no longer at the place we call Bethel. Now, it's in Jerusalem. The house of God has moved, And this is an important new development. Bethel can change locations. David dies, Solomon takes the throne, and Solomon builds a permanent home for Yahweh. He builds the beautiful temple, Solomon's temple, an amazing structure on Mount Zion. And it's splendid. There's no longer just a pile of rocks and some little temple. No, this is a palace of gold. Solomon has a son, and then he promptly dies. Solomon's son, a guy called Rehoboam, is a bit of an idiot. And because of his sin, God rips Israel in half. The northern tribes, the northern territory, is given to a man named Jeroboam. And God says to this man Jeroboam, look, I'm handing the northern tribes to you. So you need to reign justly and wisely. Don't do what Rehoboam has done. Honour me. But that is not what Jeroboam does. What does he do? 1 Kings 12. Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David if this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem. Then the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. God's told me to rule, but I don't trust what God says. And if they keep going to Jerusalem, if my people keep going to Jerusalem, well, they'll turn back to Rehoboam. So Jeroboam thinks, how can I keep them here? A bit like during the Cold War, the East Germans didn't want to let their people go to West Germany to see how good things were under capitalism. Well, that's Jeroboam's point. He doesn't want them to go down to Judah. Verse 28, so the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, you've gone up to Jerusalem for long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Why Bethel? Well, it was the southernmost part of his kingdom, and it had historical significance. It was only 80 odd years ago. This is where everyone went to talk to God anyway. Jeroboam can simply say, I'm a traditionalist. I'm just taking it back to where we always worship gods. And Jeroboam appointed a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah, and he offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he made, and he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places that he had made. He went up to the altar that he had made in Bethel on the 15th day, in the 8th month, in the month that he had devised from his own heart, and he instituted a feast for the people of Israel, and went up to the altar to make offerings. Where is Bethel? Well, it's no longer in the place that we call Bethel. There are now idols in this place where Jacob's made his monument. Where Jacob met with the Lord, now there's a golden calf. The people have been led astray. Okay, we press the fast forward button. We fast forward 75 years now. Jeroboam's died. He's been replaced by a guy called Jehoram. And in Israel, in Jehoram's time, are 2 very famous prophets, Elijah and Elisha. But Elijah has disappeared. He's gone up to heaven in a chariot. Elisha is now going to take charge. He's going to take the baton. He will now be Yahweh's messenger. He will now be the spokesman to the children of Israel. But what has become of Bethel by this time? Well, as Elisha makes his way up from the River Jordan, up the hill heading towards Bethel, we find out what state the city is in. 2 Kings 2:23. Elisha went up from there to Bethel. And while he was going up on the way, some small boys, or a better translation is some youths, some juveniles, came out of the city and jeered at him, saying, you go up, bald head. Go up, you bald head. The people of Bethel have become completely wicked. So much so that genuine prophets of God are mocked as they walk past. They're in God's front garden, at God's front door, but they don't want to hear his voice. So what happens? Well, the wrath of God is poured out on them. Elisha turned round when he saw them. He cursed them in the name of the Lord. And 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore 42 of the boys. That's what's happened to Bethel. It's become rotten. We press fast forward for the final time. 100 more years pass. Ironically, a new king is on the throne of the northern tribes, Israel, called Jeroboam II. He now rules the kingdoms. He's named himself after the wicked king who initially led the tribes astray. And it's roughly 1,300 years since Jacob has had his dream. What has become of Bethel? Where is Bethel? Where can the Israelites meet with the Lord? Well, let's ask the prophet Amos. So this isn't going to come up because it's too long a reading. So turn in your Bible to Amos chapter 7, verse 10. It's on page 769 of the church Bible, hopefully. I've got the page number right. Amos 7. In Amos, we meet a guy called Amaziah. Amaziah is a false priest. He is the high priest of Bethel. He's inviting people to come and meet God, but as they meet God, he's saying this golden calf is God. This is the God who led you out of Egypt. He's calling that calf Yahweh. And Amaziah has heard something that has upset him. Look what he says. Then Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, sent to Jeroboam II, the king of Israel, saying, Amos has conspired against you in the midst of the house of Israel. The land is not able to bear his words. So basically, we need to silence this bloke. For thus Amos, the real prophet, has said, Jeroboam shall die by the sword, and Israel must go into exile away from his land. And Amaziah said to Amos, O seer, go, flee to the land of Judah and eat bread there, and prophesy there, but never again prophesy at Bethel. For it is the king's sanctuary, and it is a temple of the kingdom. Amaziah is saying to Amos, you clear off back down south and worship your God in your way. You worship him at Jerusalem. But this is our temple. This is the kingdom. This is the sanctuary of God. We don't want you. Verse 14, then Amos answered and said to Amaziah, I was no prophet, nor a prophet's son, but I was a herdsman and a dresser of sycamore figs. But the Lord took me from following the flock. So the Lord said, stop being a shepherd. And the Lord said to me, go, prophesy to my people Israel. Now therefore, hear the word of the Lord, the real word of Yahweh. You say, do not prophesy against Israel. Do not preach against the house of Isaac. Therefore, thus says the Lord, your wife shall be a prostitute in the city. Your sons and your daughters shall fall by the sword, and your land shall be divided up with a measuring line. You yourself shall die in an unclean land, and Israel shall surely go into exile away from its land. Because Bethel has been defiled, God is going to wipe it from the face of the earth. He's going to wipe out the northern tribes. The Assyrians are going to come in and sack the city. Amaziah, the priest, is going to be taken as a slave. His wife is going to be left destitute, and unfortunately, to make ends meet, she's going to end up selling her body. And his children are going to be killed. We get a lot of foxes in London, don't we? And sometimes you'll go out in your front yard and a fox has left a sticky present during the night. Well, what do? Well, you get the jet washer out or the hose and you blast the filth from your front yards. While you're at it, you pull all the weeds up, don't you? Do a bit of gardening while you're out there, neating it up. Well, that's spiritually what God does to Bethel. It has become defiled. It's rotten. It needs to be cleansed. Okay, so we've looked at the birth, the rise, and the fall of Bethel. This little settlement. Which brings us then to a fig tree in Galilee. And underneath the fig tree is a young man, perhaps in his early 20s. I don't think he was that muscular, but AI sort of always makes people look stronger than they are. But this man, Nathanael, he loves Yahweh. He's a man who knows his Old Testament. He's been taught these stories, the things I've just told you. He knows them like the back of his hand. He's been taught them since he was a boy. What is Nathanael feeling? Well, let's think about life in Jesus' day. The Jews are back in their ancestral home. But are they in charge? Are they in charge? No. Who's in charge? The Romans. So they're home, but in fact, in many respects, they're still in exile. Where, oh where, Nathanael must be thinking, where is God's king? God appeared to Jacob and told him, your people will own this land, they'll be in control of it, and through the seed of Jacob, everyone will be blessed. Well, where is the king who's going to bring this nation back to proper Yahweh worship? Where is the son of David, the son of Jacob, who's going to deliver us from the Romans and lead us back to the Lord? This isn't a trick question. Where did first century Jews go to worship the Lord? Jerusalem. They weren't going to Bethel, were they? Who would Nathanael have seen in charge at the temple? Who run things? The priests and the scribes and the Pharisees. What would the average person think when they saw men like that? Well, there would have been a lot of fear. We know from the Gospels the Pharisees lorded it over people. They took advantage of them. They set them unrealistic targets and said, if you want to know God, this is what you've got to do. They weren't bringing people to God's house. Instead, they were acting as a barrier, preventing people from coming to God's house. They put people off. They didn't draw people in. As Nathanael sits under the fig tree, he's very much like Jacob. He feels like a stranger in his own land. He's fearful. He's alone. And what does he cry out to God? Well, how long, Lord? How long will we live like this, as slaves in our own land, with religious leaders who don't care? With Jacob, it was Esau who was trying to kill him. Well, now Jacob is threatened by the Romans. The Romans threaten the children of Jacob. They control everything. So where is the Lord? Where is Bethel? How can we find God? I can't go to Jerusalem. Why doesn't God open his front door and come and rescue us? We're his people. If I go to the temple, what am I going to find there? Well, just a load of religious people who give me rules I can't possibly keep. Religious people who Nathanael knows, they say one thing, but behind closed doors, they're wicked. He's asking, where is Bethel? Father, where is the man you promised us? Where is the king you promised Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? We'll turn back to John 1:43. Let's see what answer he gets. John 1:43. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and he said to him, follow me. Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him. We have found him, of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, he's the son of Joseph. Nathanael says, what, you found him? You found the king? Nathanael can't believe it. Verse 46, can anything good come out of Nazareth? This doesn't sound like the place the king should come from. Philip said to him, come and see. Jesus saw Nathanael coming towards him and said of him, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit. What was Jacob's name? Well, Jacob was the deceiver, the usurper. But Nathanael's not like that. He's genuine. He's genuinely looking for the Lord's. Verse 48, Nathanael said to him, how do you know me? Jesus answered him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Nathanael answered him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Jesus knows that Nathanael was begging God for a king. And now the king turns up. Verse 50, Jesus answered him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these. Nathanael's going to see miracles. He'll see the nation of Israel begin to understand the truth. He'll see the religious leaders shocked and silenced by this man. You'll see thousands of people brought back into a relationship with God. And he will see Jesus change and bring blessing to the whole world. In fact, Nathanael's going to see a new and better Israel stretch out across the globe to every tribe, tongue, and nation. Abraham's family are going to be more numerous than the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. And in verse 51, he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." Nathanael's been asking, where's Bethel? Where's the front door of heaven? Where does God come to speak to humanity? Where does God pour out his blessing on humanity? Well, it's the man, Jesus Christ, isn't it? The house of God was at Bethel and then at Jerusalem, but now it's with Christ. It's in Christ. That's where we meet the creator of heaven itself. And more wonderfully, in Jesus, God doesn't stay on his front doorstep, does he? No, he walks down the stairs. He comes down, he walks amongst us with healing in his wings. And he's the rock behind which we hide. He's the rock anointed with oil, the anointed one. He is Genesis 28 in one man. He's the rock, he's the staircase, he's God, he's at the door of heaven. He's also the door. He's also Jacob. He's the nation now in one man. All of those Genesis 28 images are in him. Question as we close then, have you knocked on the door yet? A relationship with God, forgiveness of your sins, and an eternity of love, joy and fulfillment is one knock away. And all you've got to do is grab the handle. Grab hold of Jesus. And the gates of heaven and the blessings of God will be yours. You'll be saved, ransomed, healed, restored, forgiven. Notice Jesus says the angels will be seen ascending and descending on him or with him. Well, here's the thing to think about. Only half of that claim has come true so far, hasn't it? Jesus has ascended into heaven with his angels. The disciples saw that. Nathanael saw that. But one day, very soon, he will return. He will descend with his angels. And Nathanael will see that too. And what will those angels be sent to do when they come back with Christ? What happens to those who've not had their sins scrubbed clean by the Son of Man? Well, let's ask Jesus himself. Matthew chapter 13, Matthew's Gospel 13, verse 41. Jesus says this, "The Son of Man, he will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom." So they will kick out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears to hear, let him hear.